You think his government will be a bit more left-wing?
I think the introduction of the job seekers allowance is the opening of a Pandora's box.
It has a great potential to be something that the kids coming up in 20, 30 years' time will remember.
Welcome back to another episode of Help Desk. As you can see, I have my laptop out. That means that we'll be covering serious stuff today, and in particular, we'll be talking about the National Day rally, PM Wong's first National Day rally speech. And to cover all these things and to analyze it, break it down, I have with me former NMP, now lifestyle sexy influencer, Kelvin Cheng. Thank you so much for joining me.
Good to see
and
you.
I also have my colleague with me, Min. Min writes political commentaries once in a while. He also writes about abroad news. And the two of them, they'll be having a discussion about these things. I'll try and chime in with questions every now and then. Okay, let's get right into it because we have a lot to cover. Kelvin, what did you think of PM Wong's first NDR speech?
Well, I think with all speeches, there's form and there's substance. So let's first talk about the form. I mean, I think that's going to be a briefer analysis. I think Prime Minister Lawrence came into his own during COVID. He was a very confident, eloquent, and very comforting speaker. And I think that's what launched him into the national consciousness. And that's what actually probably earned him his stripes as a national leader. Yeah. And I think that came to the fore again during the National Day rally. He delivered the speech very well. I think he was very eloquent, he was very persuasive. And I think charisma is very important. Being an effective communicator is very important as a leader, especially in the modern world where media is so important. The best ideas that are delivered without charisma cannot persuade. And as we know that our founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew was a master orator, he could galvanize the population with his fiery speeches on National Day, during elections. And I think we need a bit of that in a leader. I think that no matter how good your ideas are, if you are not an effective communicator, you cannot get it across. But on the other hand, history is replete with charismatic leaders who led their nations to do very bad things. One example would probably be, the best example would probably be Adolf Hitler, right? So it's not only form that matters, it's also substance. And I think we're here to talk about the policies as well. But I think Prime Minister Lawrence has time and again proven himself to be a very effective communicator.
Min, what were your first impressions?
It struck me how fully formed he appeared, considering this was it's not his first political speech, of course, but as for his first National Day rally, the importance of it as first time as Prime Minister, but he didn't seem overawed by the occasion. He really looked like he belonged on stage. Yeah. Like it almost felt like he'd done it before.
How do you think PM Wong's maiden speech, how did it compare to maiden speeches from years gone past?
I think first of all, National Day rallies are occasions where prime ministers use to paint a vision for the future. It's a bit, for lack of a better word, National Day rallies are a bit rah-rah, right? So you need to be able to inspire people, to be able to create a vision for Singapore, and to be able to chart a new path. And prime ministers of past have used National Day rallies, as you have said, to introduce groundbreaking measures to make a break with the past and to put a mark on their own premiership. And I think that Prime Minister Lawrence has this time, true to his, and I think I said this in our interview when he first, when he was inaugurated, right? That he wants to refresh the social compact for Singapore. And I think that is he wants to put his mark on his premiership by painting what he feels Singapore should be like. And as I said as well before, that he focuses a lot on a post-materialist Singapore, Singapore that is more compassionate, that is more inclusive, and I think this is going to be a bit controversial, and I think a bit more left-wing. And I think
You think his government will be a bit more
I think,
left-wing?
I think his government is going to, and we'll talk more about that, of course, when we come to these policies.
Yeah.
I think his government, on a political analysis of the spectrum of things, there will be more left-wing policies, and I think that speaks to possibly his own personal values, maybe the values of the 4G, and maybe it also speaks to the times. I think perhaps being the pragmatic people that we are, these are the kind of policies that we need in the current context of Singapore.
Yeah, yeah. Min, I mean, we mentioned multiple things that previous prime ministers, their maiden NDRs were remembered for. What do you think PM Wong's maiden NDR, what do you think it will be remembered for?
I hope it will be for parental leave.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that the blockbuster announcement you think that he made?
I think it's one of two possibilities. I think the other possibility is job seekers allowance.
Okay.
Hopefully, Skills Future will also be part of that as well. I mean, but that's not something that was introduced at NDR. That was introduced at the budget earlier. But yeah, I think parental leave is the one that I hope will be the thing that stands out for this particular NDR, because I think it has a great potential to be something that, the kids coming up in 20, 30 years' time will remember. Well, they won't remember, but, they'll have possibly a better relationship with their parents based on something that was, seeded in parental leave.
Yeah, and how about what Calvin was speaking about earlier? Do you think that this is a signal for a more left-wing PAP government?
On the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, like in Singapore, the difference between left and right is not as clear-cut as it is in other places. If you take this government and you put it out in sort of like a Western context where Western left and right have the differences are more pronounced, you see too many elements of both. So, this government kind of leans one way and then leans the other way every once in a while. And the way I looked at what they introduced or talked about, what PM Wong spoke about in this particular NDR, these are things that governments can do. These are not things that private businesses or individuals can do. Private individuals can't affect, HDB policy. They can't just pay for 30 weeks of parental leave on their own, right?
Yeah.
This is something you need a government to come step in and do. And I think the hope for people who are, less inclined towards government intervention is that they will, they'll see the government and they hope that they'll draw a line at the things they can do and try not to overreach. But within the realm of what governments can do, I think everybody will hope that, the PAP will maximize their influence, totally.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not totally, but
So I disagree about what is a more significant change. I think that the parental leave policy, as well as the scrapping of the GEP, they are incremental.
Okay.
They are generously incremental, but for parental leave, what was the watershed movement was not now, but when paternal leave was introduced a few years back. I think that was the watershed movement, and now we have just made it a lot more generous.
Yeah.
However, I think that the introduction of the job seekers allowance is the opening of a Pandora's box. It is actually slaying a sacred cow, the sacred cow of welfareism. And I think for eons, the PAP government, and especially for my generation, they have always exhorted us to be self-reliant, to be independent, not to depend on the government. And we have always, for my generation, Gen X, even and especially the boomer generation, It's about frugality, making sure we have enough savings to at least tide us through 6 months of unemployment. And unemployment benefits has always been the Rubicon that the PAP would not cross.
Yeah.
Right? And even the Workers' Party and other parties to the left of the PAP have been pushing for unemployment insurance, unemployment benefits for decades. And you would remember, because both of you are a lot younger than I am, but leaders of past generations would say that unemployment benefits distort incentives, right? So it causes people to not be as proactive in seeking work if the government is helping you by putting you on the dole. Whereas unemployment benefits have been a mainstay of Western governments all across the world. As I said, people say this as call this being put on the dole. And the job seekers allowance is again not any different from those in the West, where you have to prove that you're actively seeking work in order to get an allowance. But this is big because Pandora's box has been opened. So now we do have job seekers allowance. So it's no longer a debate or a discussion on whether we are going to have it or whether we are not going to have it, but how much we are going to give. From now on, from 2024 on, all discussions, all political discussions will not be about employment benefits, whether it's good or bad, but the quantum of employment benefits. And even now, you can see that people are saying that $1,000 a month for 6 months is not enough, right? So politicians on all sides of the aisle are going to be arguing now about what is enough. Is $1,000 for 6 months enough? $2,000 for 6 months? $3,000 for a year? From now on, that will be the agenda. The sacred cow has been slain.
Yeah, interesting. I know you guys are raring to talk about the policy, but before we get into that, I wanted to talk about some of the kind of bigger picture messaging that PM Wong gave in his speech. Just some quotes I wanted to highlight, right? Right at the start of his English speech, he talked about this major reset, right? To quote him, he said, realizing our new ambitions will require a major reset in our policies, to be sure, but equally important, a major reset in our attitudes too. He went on to say, transformations we seek will unfold over several years. To achieve our shared goals, I need your help, because making the lasting changes we are aiming for will require a mindset shift in all of us. So this major reset, like, what do you guys make of it? What does it mean for Singaporeans? Min, why don't you tackle that one first?
I mean, it occurs to me that in 2004, when PM Lee gave his first NDR, he also spoke about Singapore being at a crossroads. This might be the nature of how rarely we change prime ministers, but every prime ministerial change occurs somewhat at a crossroads. PM Wong is right. It's where we. I mean, as Kelvin said, we are now talking about major attitudinal changes, and some of which have already occurred, and now that the government is using policy to catch up with it. And it's going to be tough because not everybody wants the change to occur in the same direction. And navigating that will be the main challenge of the government. It's no longer what policy is correct, but how do you convince enough people? How do you assuage the fears of the people you can't convince? How do you convince people to give it a try? These are questions that will not be easy for them to go to figure out. I think the debate over job seekers allowance is actually going to be very emblematic of the difficulty that they're going to have going forward. I've heard similar sort of debates occurring over allowing singles, giving singles priority in terms of HDB, and this occurs to me that this is the start of things. It's not it. I mean, I don't think that this is the high point of change that's going to occur. This is probably going to be the low-hanging fruit of the policy change. And as things go forward for the rest of this premiership, there are more and more difficult things that will likely have to change in order to progress Singapore into the next generation. So I mean, this is kind of this is kind of the easy stuff now, and the easy stuff is already difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Calvin, I mean, you're a bit
So
older.
I'm going to be a lot more blunt than Min. I agree with Min in substance, but I think a lot of what Prime Minister Lawrence said was political rhetoric, right? I don't see a major reset from what he has rolled out. I don't see anything particularly bold. The only thing that I think was a major sacred cow that has been slain, as I said, was unemployment benefits, right? Everything else was incremental. And I think he did actually mention that when he was specifically talking about HDB flats for singles. He said it's something that he wants to explore, but because of the tightness in the supply market, there's not much he can do right now. So all he can do is to tweak the policies for singles who want to be living close to their parents, to make it easier for them to apply for HDB flats. But what would have been bold if the circumstances have allowed, and if he would do it, or the 4G government would do it in future, would be to drastically reduce the age of when singles can actually buy HDB flats, because it's still at 35, and there are all sorts of other restrictions on what they can actually buy.
Yeah.
So if for example, a bold policy would be to reduce all restrictions on singles, right? As in there shouldn't be any difference between a single Singaporean and married Singaporeans in terms of our right to be able to apply for a subsidized HDB flat.
Yeah.
That would be bold, right? And what would be bold in education would not just to tweak the GEP scheme, which at the end of the day only affects a very small number of people, but to find a way to make class numbers smaller for everyone, right across the board, because that is actually the main attraction of the GEP scheme. And that's why a lot of parents put a lot of effort into tutoring their children in the hope that they can get into a GEP scheme, because a lot more resources are put into small classes. And what would be a bold reform would be to follow the examples of the Scandinavian countries and drastically reduce the class sizes.
Yeah.
So if Prime Minister Lawrence and his team really wants a major reset, then these are the things that he needs to do. Otherwise, I see it as just tweaking things at the margin. But as Min has said, there are realities that might constrain the ability to make big moves.
Yeah.
But let's see what happens next. And I think that if every, as you said, every new prime minister says that we are at a crossroads, but whether we are going to take a different path, being very cynical, I don't think we have actually taken a lot of different routes in the past.
Yeah.
But if this is really the moment that we crossed the Rubicon in some way, then it's got to be a lot bolder.
Yeah. I found it interesting that in his Chinese and Malay speech, he made a point about talking about preserving culture.
Mm-hmm.
In his Chinese speech, he said, I also place great emphasis on the preservation of our traditional culture. Although English is our working language, we are fundamentally an Asian society, not a Western one. We want to retain our Asian heritage and preserve our traditional values. In the Malay speech, he said, I will ensure that everyone in the Malay Muslim community benefits from our nation's progress and is able to play a full role in shaping our nation's future. I'll support you in your efforts to build a Malay Muslim community that is modern and progressive while still maintaining your distinctive customs and way of life. So I think we can see that in the mother tongue speeches, he made a concerted effort to reassure, let's say, older Singaporeans that not everything is going to change. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, as I said, it's there wasn't any massive change. The only, and I need to reiterate, it was a major policy change, and it's a very big sacred cow to be slain, is unemployment benefits.
Yeah.
Because, and I cannot tell you how jarring it is for people of my generation, because for decades it's been drummed into our minds that welfareism is bad, and all of a sudden we are going to have unemployment benefits, and some people are worried.
I kind of feel the same as Calvin does about how monumental the change was, but it didn't strike me as jarring during the NDR speech because PM Wong introduced it in the budget. What was jarring for me was the number that came out in terms of how much allowance would be, and it did strike me as a bit of a surprise at how, I use this word very cautiously, low it seemed.
6,000 over 6 months.
Yeah. But this is kind of a point about signaling, as opposed to this, job seekers allowance is meant to assist as opposed to replace a job, which helps for the moment introduce it. How that number will change going forward will be very significant. But the surprise for me really was how in the next portion of the speech, PM Wong spoke about Skills Future and Level Up. And I would have thought that the obvious thing to do would be to combine the two, because, and luckily for me, I've not been retrenched yet. But it seems to me that this provides a natural point for a person in his career to actually take some time to go dedicate himself to retraining and finding so maybe not massive new direction, but kind of resetting their career track a little bit. And so I would have thought that combining the two schemes to a certain extent would be a natural thing, rather than just relying on already employed people to take time off work in order to go get training.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke about the amount, the 6,000 over 6 months. Calvin, you were saying earlier that people of a certain generation, they have a certain mindset about.
Yeah, which is why I would like to take a step back and it's something that we need to think very carefully about, and not, especially for government supporters, not mindlessly support everything that their leaders introduce. What exactly has changed between my generation and now, right? What circumstances have changed such that job benefits were wrong before, but it's the right thing to introduce right now? Are jobs more insecure? Is it harder for people to find jobs now in 2024 than it was in the 1980s? Are people being unemployed for longer times? Do people have less savings to tide them over bad times? Are families less supportive? Because people of my generation and the boomer generation, if things go really bad, we turn to our families and friends for help. We don't turn to the government. Are these values all of a sudden wrong? I mean, have they changed? One thing that has changed is that our government is a lot richer now than it was many years ago. But is this sufficient reason for us to make a U-turn on introducing job benefits to unemployed people? Because make no mistake, once this Pandora's box has been opened, it cannot be put back in, right?
Yeah.
Job benefits are now part and parcel of life in Singapore, in Singapore. And one big thing, as you were discussing, is that, as Min was saying, is that it seems a bit low. So it seems that there's still a lot of conservatism, perhaps a bit of half-heartedness in this policy change. And I think Prime Minister Lawrence alluded to this in his speech, saying that they are mindful not to distort incentives. And it's always been the justification of never having job benefits, unemployment benefits. And that's why the quantum was kept low. But having such a low quantum, does it make any difference to people, or would it make people even more dissatisfied that, hey, if you're going to give me such a small amount of help, you might as well not give them to me at all.
Yeah, yeah. I would argue that one big change actually, and I think it's a positive change, is a greater recognition of the role that mental health plays in our well-being. And I think it could be argued that having, some employment benefit, even if it's 6,000 over 6 months, could help allay some of the anxieties and
So are you saying that people of your generation are more anxious now? You are less
No, but-
mentally resilient?
I wouldn't say that, but I think there's a greater recognition that we need to address these things, and that it's an important part of a person's well-being. I don't know. I mean, do you have
I would
thoughts?
say that I don't think the current and younger generations are more or less anxious than previous generations. It's expressed differently though.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that the end result of the job seekers allowance will be for the anxiety to be allayed and not come out as destructively as it can do sometimes in older generations.
So how was this destructive in the past?
Parents yelling loud into the night, scaring the kids, is one way. I've seen older generation people kind of. I mean, they just didn't express the anxiety, and now when I'm older, I look back at that time, and you kind of look at it and you go like, that was not right. That they were scared. They were very fearful, but could not or would not express it. And they like now to say that that was strength. And I don't want to take that away from them, but I don't know whether I agree. And even if it was strength, I think that strength could be conserved and used more productively at a later time. So if this $1,000 helps people do that, I think it's on balance a good thing. There is, of course, a possibility for things to eventually progress too far, to provide too much help. But I don't think we're there at 1,000. So what we have to do as a polity is essentially police ourselves very judiciously. Always easier said than done, I'll grant. But I don't think in and of itself is the job seekers allowance is necessarily bad. But again, I am surprised at how they are implementing it. I thought a training program would have been a more logical way of doing it.
So I think that's the crux of the issue. What you said was very important. It was very illuminating that you said that $1,000 is not enough, right? So now the political debate will always be what is enough. Whereas in the past, it was wrong. We shouldn't have we shouldn't have unemployment benefits because it distorts incentives. It causes people not to be hungry enough to go out and seek work. You should be self-reliant, you should be frugal, you should have saved up for rainy days, so on and so forth. So it is a huge shift. It is a huge shift. And so we need to ask ourselves whether this is the right policy at the right time, whether things have changed, and how it's going to impact the future. And I think we are walking into a very uncertain future, because once we have done this policy change, the discussion from now forward will be about the quantum. What is enough?
Yeah.
Which is the discussion that Western societies are having all the time, right? What is enough? I mean, people always want more. And if you want more, you need to be able to pay for it. And then our taxes going to rise in order to pay for these increased unemployment benefits. What has changed? So I think this is something that we all need to ruminate over.
But I think you hit the nail on the head just now when you mentioned that one of the things that definitely has changed is Singapore's richer now. Let's say hypothetically that helping people with a job seekers allowance was always the right thing to do. I'll grant you not everybody believes that. But it's just something that Singapore could not have afforded to do in the 1980s. And it is now something that we can do now. And there are many occurrences like this. You mentioned class sizes before. In the 1970s, you could not have a class size of 10. Can you do it now? More able to do it now than before. So the question I feel is not a matter of is it right or wrong? It will be right for some people. It will be wrong for others. But I think there are also arguments that need to be had about how and not if or should we have done it. That there are, as you can see, my focus is on how this. Ultimately, I'm concerned about what the utility is. If the job seekers allowance allays fears and helps people get back into meaningful jobs, then it's great. But that's a big if.
Yeah, so what else are we rich enough to afford now, right? So if that is the argument, free healthcare, pensions for old people, right? So I don't know if we are going to go down this path, then there's a lot more that people will ask for.
Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, if your prediction is right that we are seeing a more left-wing government, I guess those are things that we will, those are debates that are to be had going forward in the future. I want to move on to talk about parental leave. Min, you talked about this as potentially being the blockbuster announcement of this NDR speech earlier. Or you were saying that you hope that that's what it will be remembered for. To be clear, the new arrangement will see, so what it is right now is that parents get 4 weeks of mandatory paternity leave, 16 weeks of maternity leave. And now with PM Wong's announcement, they will get 10 additional weeks of shared parental leave. So why do you think this is so important, or why do you think this is such an important change for Singapore, Min?
I hope that it signals the start of the government really seriously thinking about what it means to incentivize people to increase TFR. I speak to my friends about this a lot because I'm in the policy, or at least was in the policy space, so I'm interested in their responses. And I mean, it's a constant...
TFR is a fertility rate.
Fertility rate. Yeah. And I had a boss once who tried to encourage the younger staff to kind of go forth and multiply. But yeah, it was always this sort of like, what would it actually take? What does it, what is the barrier? I mean, multiple things have been noted. Like if the total fertility rate of Singapore was what it was for married people, we'd be okay. This doesn't address that, though. Yeah. So are you asking married people to have more kids? Is the government seriously thinking about what that means? Do they think parental leave is the barrier? And I actually think, no, I don't think they do. I don't think they think it's a barrier. I don't think they think that TFR is going to significantly increase because of parental leave. But what this may signal is the ability of the government to consider policy on the basis of the intangibles. The benefit to a child of spending more time with both parents is intangible. You will not know for years, if ever, whether it was a benefit. But on balance, it feels like it's something that probably would benefit the children. And that may be enough to do it. That may be enough to convince policymakers to go for it. And can you justify it in the sums? Maybe not. But if this signals a different way of approaching parenthood in Singapore from a policy basis, this has huge potential. If it's just something they're doing as like, look at us, we're increasing parental leave, then this could be a complete nothing burger. And the divergence in possibility here is huge.
Yeah. And that's what you mean by you hope.
Yes, I hope. Yeah,
this is the start.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I think Kelvin got it right. Nothing here is necessarily massive unless it leads to more in the future, right? I mean, job seekers allowance aside, but all these things as first steps are fine. As the final step, it's kind of a damn squid.
So I think I'm a lot more cynical. I don't think it's going to help at all.
Okay. Help the fertility rate.
Yes, I think people who don't want to have kids just don't want to have kids. And people who want to have kids, yes, every little thing helps, right? But so look at the Scandinavian countries. They are the most generous with their parental leave, the most generous with all the help in encouraging people to have kids. And the Nordic countries' TFR is at an all-time low.
Yeah,
I think it is part of development of a country. I think when people get wealthy, for some reason, I think I'll leave this to the sociologists to analyze. People just don't want to have kids. They
Yeah.
want, maybe because they become more selfish, they want to enjoy their lives, so on and so forth. So it's going to help those people who already want to have kids, give them the final push. But I don't think, judging from the experience in the countries that are most generous with parental leave, which are the Scandinavian countries, it's not going to help much. I think this there's a bigger problem, right? We are a super aged society, so if Singaporeans, despite the best efforts of the government, are still not going to procreate, the only solution has to be immigration.
Okay.
It has to be immigration.
Not a popular solution.
It's not a popular solution. In 2012, I think the white paper for population growth was introduced. It was very unpopular. Every election, the populist opposition parties would talk about immigration. But we need politicians with testicular fortitude to come out and grab the bull by its horns and address this issue, because it is still a problem and immigration has to be the solution. But it is so unpopular a thing to say that no elected member of parliament from the ruling party dares to take the issue by its horns.
Yeah. What do you think would be a viable policy if the government was serious about raising the fertility rate? What is something that could actually work?
I don't think anything is going to work.
Okay.
I-
Ban condoms.
It has been mentioned that TFR in the Scandic states, the Nordic states rather, is higher than Singapore. And one of the reasons why is because they are more accepting of children outside of wedlock, which is something that Singapore generally does not encourage.
Yeah.
So yes, banning condoms is one of the signs that this would be more acceptable. I have friends who have suggestions. One mentioned that if having a third child opened the door for their educations up to university level be paid for all the kids, you see a lot of two child families balloon to three. That's one thing. But he also raised a number of different points which are intractable. Like if your ideal family, not in terms of size, but was an idea of like, I would like all my kids to have their own rooms, for instance. You can't build an extra room into every single, HDB block.
Yeah.
So especially not for just the ones who want a third kid. So you have this entire idea of what your family unit will look like, both emotionally and physically, and that's something that's going to be incredibly tough. It touches every aspect. It changes how you work. It changes how you live. It changes how you save. It changes where you go on holiday. All these little things, right? It even changes where you end up going to eat on Sunday.
So actually, one radical solution was suggested by Lee Kuan Yew himself in 1987. He suggested to reintroduce polygamy.
Okay.
So it was very unpopular, obviously. I think studies have shown that polygamous societies have higher TFRs than monogamous societies. I just bring this up as an interesting tidbit. I think it's never going to happen, and I don't even have one wife. Who am I to ask for more than one?
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to talk about some of the political stuff when it comes to NDR. Kelvin, you've wrote on your Facebook about opposition parties talking about the NDR speech and some of the new initiatives. Go on, why don't you tell us a bit more about that?
So I think every time, and I am pretty neutral about this, so every time the ruling party makes a policy shift, opposition parties and their supporters come out to try to claim credit. And then there's a huge fight amongst the supporters that I said it first, he said it first, blah, blah, blah. But I think this is all very childish. It's very unimportant who said what first, because there are no new ideas in the world. So like, I think I said in my Facebook that unemployment benefits was first introduced in the UK. What was it? I think it was
By Asquith,
yeah,
you said.
1911.
1911, I think.
Yeah, in 1911, right? So they're very, and I'm sure that even then, that's only in the modern world, because I read a lot about history and I know that the Romans were pretty generous with their pensions as well for retired soldiers. So I think it's really unimportant who said what first, but I think more importantly, we need to understand that the ideas are not the most important, but having the execution and having the right idea at the right time is very important. And why do I bring this up? I think that is a measure of true leadership, whether it's in politics or in the business world, to understand when things have changed and when to change course because things have changed. And that's a true mark of a good leader, to understand when to change course and when not to fix things that aren't broken.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, the opposition politicians also want to show that they are making an impact on the national discourse. And I suppose from that perspective, that might explain why the rush, so to speak, to claim credit. Min, I want to ask you, if you were an opposition politician, put yourself in the shoes of someone in one of the opposition parties. What are the questions that you would be asking after hearing the NDR speech?
I mean, I think Calvin got it right in the sense that a lot of what they're claiming credit for is kind of low-hanging fruit. You just say, I think there should be help for the unemployed, and then that covers a wide range of potential policies, right? Generally making things easier for singles to buy homes. That's a very wide net you've cast there. It's a bit tough because none of the opposition parties right now are themselves seeking government. They themselves openly say so. So it kind of limits what they can say or what they can offer in terms of ideas or alternatives, because everything they say is something essentially for the government to steal, right? I mean, that's now functionally the purpose. They should not be complaining about it being stolen. They should be incredibly happy about it being stolen. But again, it's such a wide net. I mean, you can pick a problem, say something should be done, then when something is done, claim credit. It's not particularly helpful. But I think at least if they started with picking at things that were not talked about in the NDR, things that are gaps that are still yet to be filled or even addressed, that would be a good starting point. It would be at least a signal that they have wider breadth than what is on display at the NDR.
Yeah.
So I think for the opposition to be able to claim credit, they need to seek, as Min said, they need to seek to be an alternative government. And in order to seek to be an alternative government, they need to present a vastly different alternative vision. So I think one of the criticisms of the Workers' Party is that they are PAP light.
Yeah.
They see what PAP does, take one step to the left. Nothing wrong with that, but I think that in order to put a clear dividing line between the opposition and the ruling party, then you need to present a vastly different vision on critical issues. And why do I say that? Because I'm now watching the American elections and looking at the RNC and the DNC. These two sets of politicians do present vastly different visions of what American society should look like.
Yeah.
Right? So like, for example, today at the DNC, the leaders of the Democrats are suggesting a much higher corporate tax for America, 25%. Trump is saying, let's have it at 15%. There's a huge dividing line on abortion, right? Roe versus Wade. So these two parties present two very conflicting ideas of what America should look like. In Singapore, the strongest opposition party does not have a vastly different vision of what Singapore should look like compared to the ruling party. So it is very hard to then say that, hey, this is what I have presented to the Singapore people, and the Singapore people has rejected what you have presented, and they've accepted my vision.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference with the American system is we don't have a two-party system, right? We have, you can have multiple parties in
But in
parliament.
order to have a two-party system, then you need to have a second party that presents a completely different vision.
And you could argue that we don't want that kind of polarization in our society. I mean, that we are seeing in America right now.
But actually, there is an alternative. The United Kingdom recent general election is one example of this. The Labour Party is catching a lot of flack from its own left-leaning activists that it is essentially the Tory Party light,
Yeah.
the Conservatives. One of their favorite examples is that the new finance minister has essentially promised to keep to the same sort of financial guidelines as the Tory Party has. But what their differentiating point was that whatever the Conservatives said they would do, we can actually enact. We can bring sort of like stability to a government which says a lot of things but cannot do anything. That is an alternative that opposition parties can say. It's like they say the right thing, but we can actually enact.
So this is very true, and this is correct. So which means that instead of fighting on ideas, you are competing on competence, right? You are saying that, listen, my ideas are not that different from yours, so the whole debate on whose idea this is moot, because our ideas are almost the same, but we are more competent, so we are able to execute the ideas better.
Okay, I think that's a great way to end our episode. Don't worry, you guys. Help Desk hasn't done a major reset. We'll be back with more regular programming soon. I think later this week, actually. So you can look forward to that episode. But that's all for this episode. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.
Thank you.